It started with something so quiet. Most didn't even notice. No sirens, no flashes, just a subtle shift, like the air itself had paused to listen. Somewhere over the Atlantic, high above the sleeping waves, reality gave way. Not with thunder, not with fury, but with a hum, a low, resonating hum, like a cathedral organ pressed against your bones. At 3:17 Universal Time Coordinated, satellite NORAD, 451 caught it first. A distortion, a ripple, a jagged black tear stitched itself into the upper atmosphere, like someone had dragged a knife through the fabric of the sky. And through that wound, they came. They weren't ships, not really. No engines, no wings, just shapes, smooth, geometric, impossible, obsidian structures that shimmered like wet glass. They moved like thoughts, not machines. No fire trails, no heat, just presence. The world didn't have time to react. The sky above the Atlantic simply changed. A Portuguese fisherman, old and sun-worn, was the first to speak of it. He'd been out alone that night, chasing tuna by instinct, more than luck. When he looked up, he didn't see lights. He saw absence, a perfect black triangle, blotting out the stars, hanging above the ocean like judgment. He dropped his net and whispered, "Oh, Inferno Shegu, hell has arrived." By dawn, the world was no longer the same. News networks scrambled, their anchors too composed to admit they were terrified. Military radars blinked red across 6 continents. The anomaly spread, not physically, but emotionally, a weight pressing down on everyone at once. The fear wasn't immediate. It was creeping, like standing in a forest and realizing the birds have gone quiet. And then the first pulse hit. A wave of electromagnetic force, silent and invisible, swept across the globe. Communications shattered. Power grids collapsed like puppets with snipped strings. Planes fell from the sky like wounded birds. There was no pattern, no demands, no contact, just that low hum. In those first 24 hours, the planet cracked at the seams. Governments screamed into dead radios. Cities flickered between light and blackout. People, ordinary, everyday people, watched their screens glitch, their clocks freeze, their certainties break. No one knew what the invaders wanted. That's what made it worse. They didn't fire weapons. They didn't land. They didn't speak. They simply arrived, floating above oceans and deserts and cities, watching, waiting. Some called them gods, others demons. Scientists labeled them unknowns. Children pointed and said, ghosts. But no matter what name we gave them, one truth remained. They were not us. And for the first time in history, the human race looked up and felt small. But something else stirred beneath the panic, beneath the chaos. A memory. Because we've always been like this, surrounded by storms and still daring to light candles. We've endured fire and famine, wars that tore families apart, diseases that swept continents. But we survived. That survival wasn't always pretty or noble, but it was ours. And now, standing beneath this alien sky, humanity faced its most terrifying question. Would we break or would we burn brighter? The answer came from an unexpected place. Not a general, not a president, but a man named Elijah Gant, a retired miner from South Africa, living alone in a broken house near Johannesburg. He'd fought in 2 wars, lost his son to the last one. He'd seen enough of the world to know when it was about to end. And yet, when a Valari obelisk hovered silently above his town, blotting out the sun, Elijah didn't hide. He didn't cry. He walked outside with a flare gun, his hands shaking from age and rage, and fired it into the sky. Not to attack, not to signal help, but to say something, to let them, whoever they were, know that he was still here. The flare arced, red and defiant, against the alien black. Someone captured it on a drone cam. The footage went viral in hours, bouncing between bunkered servers, stolen satellites, rogue networks. No sound, just a flare in the dark. But the caption burned across every screen. If we are to die, let it be standing. Fists clenched, eyes open. And that was the moment Earth changed. It wasn't a rallying cry. It wasn't orchestrated. It was instinct. From New York to Nairobi, Cairo to Kyoto, people started stepping outside again. Not to fight, not yet, just to face the sky. Mothers held their children up so they could see the ships. Veterans pulled uniforms from closets and cleaned their medals. Old radios buzzed to life with pirate broadcasts whispering, "You are not alone." Even in silence, even in dread, something ancient had awoken in us. Not courage, not yet, but defiance. The Valari, we didn't know their name then, but we would, hovered still, unmoving, watching the ants below. They had seen countless species before us, civilizations that collapsed the moment the sky opened, cultures that offered themselves in fear or fire. But humans? We stood there, dirty and fractured, clutching our loved ones and homemade weapons, and we looked up. We dared to watch them back. In a hidden underground lab beneath Reykjavik, a scientist named Ayaka Tanaka ran a pulse scan across one of the objects. Her face lit by flickering monitors, surrounded by darkness and diesel generators. She whispered the results to her team. "They're not machines. They're listening." That changed everything, because it meant we weren't just being invaded. We were being judged. World leaders convened, not in marble halls, but in makeshift bunkers, over patchy links and handwritten notes. For once, no country stood taller than the rest. Not the US, not China, not Russia. Pride was a luxury. In its place, something simpler bloomed: survival. And in the chaos, a single unified broadcast reached what remained of Earth's communication networks. It was grainy, shaky, but powerful. A soldier, young, armored, unknown, standing on a scorched rooftop in Mumbai. Smoke behind him, Valari monolith above. He stared directly into the lens and said, "We are not afraid of the dark, because we are the fire, and we do not go quietly." The words etched themselves into the soul of the world. By nightfall, humanity had done something miraculous, not by defeating the enemy, but by choosing to stand. Mothers filled bottles with gasoline. Students dug trenches on college campuses. Artists painted resistance murals over the crumbling walls of old cities. Hackers hijacked alien signals and laced them with human music: Beethoven, Tupac, Fela Kuti, punk rock. Every corner of the earth lit aflame, not to signal surrender, but to remind the universe who we are. The Valari remained motionless, cold, untouched, but we changed. This wasn't the final battle. It wasn't even the beginning of the war, but it was the moment Earth found its voice. Not in weapons, not in leaders, but in each other. A fisherman with a whisper, a miner with a flare, a child lifting a flag in a city she couldn't pronounce. This was how the legend began, when the sky split open, and Earth stood alone and did not kneel. Lisbon was never supposed to be a battlefield. It was a city of sunlight and sodade, that tender kind of sorrow only the Portuguese could ever truly name. It was red rooftops on rolling hills. It was laughter echoing through narrow alleys. It was pastel walls, hands held under lanterns, guitars under stars. And then, one morning, the sky forgot all of that. No warning, no build-up, just a shift. The air thickened, like breathing through wet cloth. Birds vanished, dogs whimpered without reason, and the wind stopped moving. At 6:32 a.m., the first beam fell. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't fire. It was something worse, a sliver of pure, soundless white. It came from the heavens, carving down like a judgment passed by indifferent gods, not with fury, but precision. A tower near Praca do Comércio disintegrated mid-sentence. One moment bricks and glass and office chatter, the next, vapor, and then another, and another. In the span of 4 minutes, 7 blocks of central Lisbon became dust. People ran. Some screamed. Most didn't. They were still trying to understand what was happening. How do you process something so massive, so final? How do you run from the sky? Some called it a cleansing. Others would later call it the calibration. The Valari's way of reminding us they were still watching, still listening, still measuring the noise we called defiance. But in those first moments, it just felt like annihilation. Entire buildings folded in on themselves, like pages turning in a book. Cafes became craters, hospitals became holes, and the silence afterward, that was the cruelest part. No sirens, no birds, just the wind, finally returning, dragging with it ash and memories. At the edge of the blast zone, fire crews worked on instinct alone. Radios were down, cell towers gone. No command, no dispatch, just screams, smoke, and the impossible. Among them was a firefighter named Marco Silva, 49, divorced, 2 grown daughters, a Lisbon native, the kind of man who always showed up early and always stayed late, because he didn't know how to live any other way. He wasn't supposed to be on duty that morning. He'd swapped with a younger colleague the night before. "Get some sleep," he'd said. "I've got this." And now, he stood at the edge of the ruins, blinking through smoke and static, holding a radio that no longer connected to anything. He didn't hesitate. He strapped on his gear, climbed over collapsed concrete, and started pulling people out with his bare hands. Not because he thought it would matter in the grand scheme of things, but because it did. To the child trapped beneath the rubble, to the mother with her leg pinned beneath a desk, to the teenager holding the hand of his dead brother. To them, Marco mattered. At 7:09 a.m., a second pulse swept the sky. This one wasn't a beam. It was a ripple, like a bell being rung across dimensions. Satellite feeds blinked to life for exactly 17 seconds, just long enough to catch it. Above Lisbon, above the ash and the blood and the chaos, hovered the Volari Sentinel, a perfect monolith of obsidian and mirrored glass, unmoving, uncaring, reflecting back the fires it had lit below. But here's the thing the Volari never understood. We are a species born in fire. We've danced with it, cooked over it, fought wars by it, fell in love beside it. We've cursed it and worshipped it and walked through it. And when it comes for us, we don't run, we rise. Somewhere deep in the Swiss Alps, hidden inside an old particle physics bunker, remnants of Earth's remaining command structure were watching. Barely powered, surviving on diesel and faith, they saw the footage from Lisbon. Silva's footage, broadcast from a body cam that still pinged satellites no one could access anymore. It wasn't dramatic, just shaky, grainy shots of a firefighter hauling survivors out of smoke-choked corridors. His voice was hoarse, his eyes bloodshot. At one point, the camera caught him climbing the skeleton of a ruined hospital, holding a flare gun, one hand pressed against his side, bleeding. And when he reached the top, he lit the flare. It screamed up into the sky, painting red across the alien black, a dot of fury against something far beyond human comprehension. And somehow it was enough. The signal cut, the flare faded. But that image, a single man, standing alone on a broken rooftop, firing color into the void, that image didn't fade. It spread, like fire does. By nightfall, every major Earth satellite still functioning was redirected, not to monitor, not to observe, but to fight back. At 3:44 p.m. Universal Time Coordinated, in an abandoned drone control center beneath Tehran, a team of 3 teenagers hijacked a decommissioned Chinese defense satellite. They bypassed the launch authentication, using, of all things, an old TikTok encryption joke, and pointed it straight at the Lisbon Sentinel. They didn't ask for permission. They just acted. Seconds later, a railgun projectile, cold, fast, and furious, pierced the upper atmosphere and scraped the side of the Volari ship. It didn't destroy it, but it mattered, because for the first time since the sky split open, we touched them, and the Volari flinched. Around the world, the effect was immediate. In Nairobi, underground engineers lit up dormant radio towers with jury-rigged batteries and human sweat. In Berlin, retired war veterans raided an abandoned NATO depot, dragging out rusted tanks and wrapping them with blankets to warm the electronics. In New York, street gangs, police, and volunteer medics formed fire brigades, not to fight aliens, but to keep the lights on. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't brilliance. It was something older, messier, human. We didn't wait. We refused to wait. In a ruined square near the heart of Lisbon, Marco Silva finally collapsed. His oxygen tank was empty. His ribs were cracked. His voice was gone. But he'd pulled out 23 survivors before he dropped to his knees. And just before the medics dragged him to shelter, he reached out, bloody fingers trembling, and pointed to the sky. "Tell them," he croaked. But then the words caught in his throat. So he didn't say anything else. He just pointed, with fire in his eyes. Later, his daughters would see that footage. They'd sit together in a bunker beneath the Pyrenees and cry and laugh and whisper. That was our dad. That was him, still fighting. And they weren't the only ones. Across the world, the footage of Silva's flare was seen by billions, sometimes on flickering screens, sometimes as a still image passed hand to hand. It was printed on walls, carved into helmets, tattooed onto arms. It became a symbol, not of victory, not of vengeance, but of reminder that we were still here. That night, Earth didn't sleep. It watched, it gathered, it rebuilt. In candlelight and code, in prayer and circuitry, humanity began stitching itself back together, not from hope, but from defiance. And high above, in the cold black silence of space, the Volari ships turned ever so slightly. They recalibrated, measured, noted. They had expected surrender, but what they found was something else, something burning, something angry, something human. There are places built with blueprints, and then there are places built with blood. New Delphi was the second kind. It wasn't on any map 6 months ago, didn't exist on satellite scans, had no government stamp, no formal borders. But when the sky opened and Lisbon burned, humanity realized something awful. The cities we had weren't going to save us, so we built a new one. Not with ceremony, not with committees, but with bare hands, broken machines, and a clock ticking loud in our ears. They picked the site because of the geography. A narrow valley, steep and rocky, between the Hindu Kush and a forgotten stretch of desert. A place most armies wouldn't dare approach without a death wish. It had mountains like walls and silence like a warning. At first it was just tents, then metal containers, then bunkers, one after another, like bones rising from dirt. But within weeks, it became something more. A fortress, New Delphi, a city not for the living, but for the last stand. People came by the thousands. Engineers from Tokyo with burned hands and sleepless eyes. Kenyan tacticians whose grandfathers had written guerrilla warfare into textbooks. Chilean coders with solar rigs strapped to donkeys. Old warriors and young believers. Survivors and the broken. There were no countries here. No uniforms. No anthems. Only resolve. They weren't here to hide. They were here to make Earth loud again. At the city's core was the Flame Tower, a monolith of old steel and new hope, built from the bones of downed satellites, missile husks, even scrap from the Eiffel Tower. A beacon, always burning, always humming with energy. Above it, an old flag waved. Not one nation's, but a crude stitched patch of every flag they could find, sewn together like a prayer. And beneath it, the first whispers of the Council of Flame began. Not politicians, but believers. Believers in the idea that humanity didn't need to wait for a savior. It could become one. But the Volari, they noticed. 3 weeks after New Delphi stood, they sent their answer. A drone storm. No ships, no words, just black clouds in the shape of death. It started with a shadow. At first, they thought it was a sandstorm, but it moved too clean, too fast. Then the sound came. Not thunder, not wind. A clicking, insectoid, rhythmic, like the sky was made of gears chewing bone. Thousands of drones poured from the upper atmosphere, each one the size of a hawk, shaped like a dagger, pulsing with alien green. They didn't fly, they hunted. Inside New Delphi, alarms screamed. Raw, mechanical, and every hand went to work. Gunners to the towers, hackers to the signal nodes, medics to the triage tunnels. But it wasn't enough, because these drones didn't just kill. They burrowed. Little shards of intelligent metal, sharp as betrayal, wriggling into cracks, slithering through vents, learning as they moved. And they screamed, a shrill, high-pitched frequency, not meant for ears, but for minds. Some dropped to the ground, clutching their skulls. Others tried to drown it out with their own voices. But a few adapted. There was a boy named Amir, 14 years old, born blind, in the Karachi dust. He came to New Delphi clinging to his grandmother's hand, silent, curious. He never spoke much, but he listened, not like most people, not with pity in his ears or fear in his heart. He listened to the world, the vibrations, the hum of generators, the subtle rhythm of boots on concrete. And when the drones came, he heard something else, a pattern. He sat on the floor of a bunker, head tilted, fingers pressed against the metal wall, and he whispered, "They're coming from beneath." At first, no one believed him, until the floor cracked open 10 minutes later. From that moment on, they stopped treating him like a child. They called him Seeker, and he saved them more times than anyone could count. The siege of New Delphi lasted 6 days. 6 days without sleep. 6 days of rationed air and firelight. 6 days of watching the walls breathe, waiting for the next scream, the next breach, the next metallic slither of death. They called it the Iron Wake, because that's what was left behind after each wave. Wreckage, shards, ashes, and yet, the city held. Commander Arlo Nyemba led the defense, a man whose voice was gravel and whose heart had seen too much. He once taught philosophy at the University of Accra. Now, he strapped grenade belts to his chest and whispered Plato in between detonations. In one recorded moment, just after blowing a breached tunnel closed with a stolen missile, he turned to the nearest camera drone and said, "They think we are afraid to die, but they have not seen what we do to survive." That footage would later play on every survivor screen, every pirate broadcast, every hacked Volari signal, and the tagline burned below it like a scar. Still human, still here. By day 4, food was gone. By day 5, air was thin. By day 6, half the defense turrets were offline, and the generators wheezed like dying lungs. And yet, no one left. No one fled, because there was nowhere left to go. And more importantly, no one wanted to give them the city. Then, as if tired of playing, the Volari sent something new. A breachworm, 20 meters long, forged from living metal and seething with logic. It cracked the earth open like an egg and slithered into the command chamber beneath Flame Tower. Screams erupted. Fire poured from the ceiling. The lights died. And then silence. When the backup team reached the chamber 30 minutes later, they expected death. Instead, they found the breachworm dead, curled in on itself, smoking. And beside it, a woman, Zara Al-Masri, systems engineer, radio tech, once a wedding singer, now bleeding, half her face burned, sitting on a pile of alien circuitry with a crowbar in one hand and a scorched power node in the other. She'd pried its neural core apart with her bare hands. She looked up and grinned, teeth missing, eyes wild, and muttered, "Told you I wasn't just tech support." They carried her out on their shoulders. When the final drone fell, it didn't explode. It just froze midair, hovered for a moment, flickered, then dropped to the ground like a stone. Dead silence followed. No cheers, just breath. Heavy, human breath. New Delphi had held, at a cost, but it held. After the siege, they didn't throw a parade. They didn't have the strength. Instead, they painted every building, every wall, not in banners, but in names, of the lost, of the defenders, of the civilians who held hands in the dark so others wouldn't feel alone. Names like Marco Silva, like Zara, like Amir the Seeker. And next to the Flame Tower, scrawled in 10-foot letters with red paint made from crushed circuits and human blood, someone wrote, "This city breathes because we bled." The Volari recalculated again. They saw a pattern they didn't like. A resilience not based in tech or strategy or command hierarchy, but something older, humanity. And so, New Delphi became something more than a stronghold. It became a signal that the planet wasn't giving up, that we didn't need angels or peace treaties or even hope. We needed grit, fury, and each other, because when the sky fell, we didn't scatter. We built a city and made it sacred with our blood. It started with a song, crackling through a makeshift comm link, barely holding together under miles of atmosphere and grief. A woman's voice, low, smooth, ancient, singing in Old Norse, or something close to it. Just melody and breath, rising above the chaos like smoke from a battlefield pyre. That was how the Valkyries flew, not with silence, but with purpose and a little bit of music. They weren't supposed to exist. The Valkyrie Squadron was never officially sanctioned. No budget, no fleet command, no recruitment drive. They were ghosts, built from scraps and rage, held together by salvaged alien tech, willpower, and duct tape. Pilots who had lost too much and wanted nothing more than to give back everything they had left. Their jets weren't jets anymore. Not really. They were old Earth relics. F-22s, Su-57s, J-31s, retrofitted with stolen Volari propulsion cores, hot-wired AI, and cockpits wired for human desperation. They called them screechers because when they punched through the sound barrier, the sky screamed. And leading them was Commander Idris Kale. Kale was a legend, even before the sky broke open. Martian-born, raised in the colony domes, where gravity was light but survival was heavy. She joined Earth's Air Forces before she could legally drink water without a ration card. First to complete a transstratospheric dive, survived 2 orbital breaches, discharged after an unauthorized bombing run on a corporate convoy that was selling weapons to the wrong side of history. She wasn't just fearless, she was tired of waiting for permission. When the Valari Spire appeared in low Earth orbit, a pulsing construct of shifting angles and silent menace, Kale didn't wait for orders. She built a team, 10 pilots, all broken in their own ways, all hungry for one last fight. The mission was simple, if you said it fast enough. Ascend, breach the atmosphere, hit the spire, get out, if you can. They launched at twilight. No ceremony, just nods and final messages sent to no one in particular. A few scrawled names onto their hulls. Others etched promises into the grips of their throttles. Kale just whispered, "Burn bright," and pulled her helmet down. They rose like fury made metal, trailblazing through the clouds in a V formation so sharp it looked like a blade carving open heaven. The old radar towers picked them up, one by one, and lit up in silent tribute. Somewhere, a child pointed to the sky and asked, "Are those angels?" Close enough. At 85,000 feet, the sky turned black. Not night black, not storm black, space black. The kind of darkness that swallows your thoughts if you stare too long. Up ahead, the Valari Spire loomed. A floating riddle, larger than anything humanity had ever built, yet somehow impossibly graceful. Its surface shimmered with mathematical patterns, alive, breathing, shifting. It didn't turn to face the Valkyries. It let them come, and that was the first warning. The ambush hit at 92,000 feet. Kale's HUD screamed with red alerts just as her wingman disappeared. Not exploded, just gone, swallowed by a writhing shape that had no heat signature, no radar trail, just movement, like liquid shadow. Then another pilot vanished, and another. Sky serpents, that's what the squad started calling them later. Long, eel-like creatures of alien alloy, capable of folding space around them like cloth. They danced between the Valkyries like whispers, slipping past every Earth defense system. But Kale didn't panic. She never panicked. She rolled hard left, kicked her thrusters to max burn, and cut two of the serpents with a plasma sweep that lit the night in electric blue. The Valkyries roared. Dogfights in space are nothing like the movies. No up, no down, no breaks, just vectors and instincts. A ballet of death where milliseconds are the difference between heroism and dust. The Valkyries danced, harder than they ever had. Yelena took 3 down before ejecting into the void, her screams going silent. Zhang locked 2 serpents together with a harpoon tether, rode them into the spire, and detonated. 8 became 6, then 5, then 3, and then just Kale. Her jet was bleeding. Oxygen alarms blared, fuel leaking, velocity fluctuating. But the spire was right there, so close she could see reflections of herself on its mirrored surface. A tired woman, gritting her teeth, trailing smoke and prayers. And in that moment, Kale smiled, not out of joy, out of recognition. "You don't win wars with clean hands," she muttered. "You win them with scars." She dove straight into the heart of the Valari Spire, not aiming to disable, not to cripple, to deliver something. In her cockpit sat the last scream of Earth's rage, a fusion core, jury-rigged with enough power to vaporize a small mountain. No remote detonation, just a timer. Manual. Kale punched it. 12 seconds. She opened her comms one last time. All frequencies. No encryption. "This is Commander Idris Kale. Valkyrie 01. You came to our sky. Thought we'd kneel. Thought we'd beg. But we are the children of dust and steel. We are the ones who learned to fly not to escape, but to fight back. Tell your gods, we're not afraid to burn." And then she laughed. The kind of laugh that comes after every other emotion has burned away. The explosion didn't echo. There's no sound in space. But on Earth, hundreds of cameras caught the moment. The flash that lit up the stratosphere like a second sun. A wave of violet and fire that shimmered across the clouds. And in its heart, silence. For 37 seconds, every Valari obelisk worldwide went still. Every drone, every worm, every watcher, frozen, like something had changed, like something had died that mattered to them. And on Earth, people stood up from wherever they were, bunkers, shelters, ruins, and looked skyward, not in fear, but in awe. Kale didn't make it back. She never intended to, but she reached them, and that was more than anyone had done before. In New Delphi, a wall was painted the next day, just black and white, no colors. A sketch of a woman, helmet under her arm, wind in her hair, staring into a sky full of stars. Underneath, a single line. She flew into fire, so we could breathe in light. The Valkyries were gone, but what they left behind was a crack, not just in the Valari spire, but in the fear, because now the world knew. We could touch them, we could hurt them, and if we could hurt them, then maybe, just maybe, we could win. The cold doesn't care who you are. It doesn't bend for politics, for prayers, for bloodlines. It doesn't care if you're a king or a mechanic or just someone trying to live long enough to see another sunrise. In Antarctica, in the frozen belly of Earth, the cold simply is. And in that place, beneath a glacier that hadn't moved in 10,000 years, something ancient had begun to stir. It was discovered by accident. A seismic technician named Eva Santos, Chilean-born, quiet, the kind of person who talked more with machines than with people, was running a deep scan near McMurdo Station. Her readings were routine, the kind of work that made scientists forget their own birthdays. But this time, something twitched. Not a quake, not a rift, a signal, low, repeating, almost like breath. It pulsed beneath the glacier, rhythmic, mechanical, but organic too, like a heartbeat carved into steel. Eva stared at the waveform for nearly an hour, not quite understanding why she was crying. Later, she would say, it didn't feel alien. It felt like something that had been waiting. They called it Site V9. They tried to keep it quiet. Didn't matter. Within 48 hours, 3 recon teams had already mobilized, not from governments, but from the growing underground web of Earth's resistance. Scientists, soldiers, nomads with nothing to lose. They brought drills, plasma cutters, and an uneasy kind of reverence, because they didn't know if they were about to find salvation or a tomb. The digging took 5 days. 5 days of wind howling like the ghosts of extinct species. 5 days of diesel generators choking against the frost. And then, on the 6th day, they found it. A chamber, perfectly round, 40 meters below the ice. Not carved, not built, grown. That's what the lead structural analyst said. Grown, like a crystal or coral or something halfway between life and architecture. The walls shimmered faintly, reacting to touch, to sound, even to emotion. And in the center of it all, a figure. It was tall, not alien, not human, somewhere in between. Metal fused to bone, armor fused to muscle. Its face was a blank mask, smooth and eyeless. But its posture said everything. This wasn't a prisoner. This was a guardian, and it was waiting for something, or someone. Commander Juno Rahal led the team down, a veteran of New Delphi, scarred face, silver in her hair, known across the resistance as the one who held Sector 5 with a knife and a smile. She stood before the figure, breath fogging in the cold, and whispered, "Are you one of theirs, or one of ours?" No answer. But then, a flicker, just a shimmer across the mask's surface, like it had hurt her. They called it the Gravekeeper, and for 72 hours, it didn't move. Not when they scanned it, not when they touched the walls, not when a tech tried to slice into the central console and got thrown 10 feet back with a nosebleed. But on the 4th night, as the winds outside screamed louder than ever, it opened its eyes. Not eyes, really, but lights. 2 glowing slits, golden and sad, like it had seen too many wars and didn't want to see another. Juno stood in front of it, hands raised, heart pounding. "We don't want to fight you," she said. "We just don't want to die." The Gravekeeper didn't speak, not with words. It simply turned, slow, deliberate, and pressed one hand to the wall. And the chamber lit up. Images flickered across the walls. Not drawings, not projections, memories. Whole galaxies folding in on themselves. Civilizations turned to glass. Planets burning without screams. And always the Valari, not as warriors, but as cleaners, erasing what they deemed corrupted logic. That's what they called it. The death of chaos. The end of unpredictability. The sterilization of imperfection. The Valari didn't see themselves as conquerors. They saw themselves as surgeons. And Earth was the tumor. Juno fell to her knees, because in that moment, she understood. The Valari weren't here to rule us. They were here to erase us. Not for what we did, but for what we are. Messy, emotional, wild, illogical, human. The Gravekeeper turned to her then, reached out a hand, and pressed 2 fingers to her temple. She didn't flinch, and suddenly, in her mind, a single word bloomed, resonant. Later, Juno couldn't explain what happened, only that she saw, everything. Memories not her own, thoughts she didn't recognize, but somehow understood. She saw Earth's future, shattered or burning, but also something else. A choice, a key, and the Gravekeeper was the lock. It was a weapon, but not one made of fire or steel. It was a frequency, a countersignal, something the Volari couldn't predict, couldn't compute, couldn't erase. Because it wasn't math. It was music. It was grief. It was rage and memory and poetry and imperfection bundled into sound. It was us. The Gravekeeper showed them how to build it, not with machines, but with humans, voices, heartbeats, a chorus of raw, unfiltered, chaotic life. They called it the Pulse. And Site V9 became a sacred forge, not of metal, but of meaning. They began recording, children laughing, mothers singing lullabies, lovers reading letters, the sound of a heartbeat during childbirth, the silence after a death. Every frequency tuned not to precision, but to emotion. The pulse would not kill the Volari, but it would make them feel. And that might be worse, because that's what Earth had always had. The one weapon no invader, no machine, no god had ever truly understood. Our chaos, our ache, our unbearable, beautiful noise. And beneath the glacier, as the winds raged outside, a woman named Eva played a simple guitar chord, and the Gravekeeper listened. And for the first time since it opened its eyes, it smiled. Some revolutions are loud, explosions, battle cries, flags raised over smoke and blood, but others begin in whispers, barely heard at first, carried between people like secrets, like sparks. And one spark, just one, can start a fire that consumes an empire. They called it the Ember Signal. It was born not in a lab, not in a military base, but in the shadows between battles, in the cracks of cities barely holding together, in the soft static between songs. It began as a test, a side project, a signal made from emotion, not algorithms. Songs, stories, bits of old poems whispered into dead microphones, field recordings of laughter, of mourning, of silence too heavy to carry alone. It was meant to confuse the Volari, but something unexpected happened. It connected us. At first, it was just a low-frequency hum, piggybacking on abandoned satellite channels. Almost nobody noticed, until a group of orphans in the ruins of Prague found a radio. Old thing, rusted, held together with scavenged parts and prayer. They turned it on and heard a girl singing, soft, broken, in Urdu, a lullaby, barely a whisper, crawling through static. The children didn't understand the words, but they understood the feeling, and they played it again and again. From that moment on, the Ember Signal spread. No one controlled it. It wasn't transmitted by towers or broadcast by generals. It moved on its own, through old transistor radios, through buried fiber lines, through airwaves long thought dead. It sounded different everywhere. In Lagos, it was a man reciting lost Yoruba verses. In Kyoto, it was the sound of rain falling on temple stones. In Detroit, it was jazz filtered through grief. But everywhere it went, people stopped what they were doing and listened. In Sector 12, an old mining colony in Kazakhstan, an entire militia laid down their weapons for 5 full minutes, just to listen to a child's heartbeat broadcast over their comms. No one spoke, no one moved. They just sat in that moment, remembering what they were fighting for. Not territory, not vengeance, life. The Volari noticed, of course. They always noticed, but they didn't understand. Not at first, because this wasn't tactical. It wasn't logical. It was something else. Something they didn't have a word for. Something we call soul. And then the first anomaly happened. In eastern Siberia, a drone cluster began erratic behavior mid-patrol. No human interference. No weather disruption. Just a change in pattern. The drones began circling a single frozen tree. Over and over. When the wreckage was recovered later, they found the source. A broken transmitter, looping a single voice over and over. Even when we fall together. It wasn't a weapon, not in the traditional sense, but the Ember Signal was doing something the Volari couldn't fight. It was making them hesitate. That's when they came. The children, not soldiers, not spies, kids, all born after the sky broke open. They'd never known peace, never heard real silence, never seen Earth without ash in the air. But they knew the signal. They grew up with it, humming in the background, laced into their dreams. And something inside them responded. One by one, they began to sing. Not for show, not for command, just because they felt it. some in harmony, others alone, but always in tune with something deeper, older, a frequency not measured in hertz, but in hope. In Mumbai, a girl named Nisha climbed atop a ruined bus and started humming. No music, just breath and sound. And the drones circling overhead stopped. For 21 seconds, they hovered, then turned away. In Rio, a boy named Elias began painting ember glyphs, wild spirals, hand-drawn loops, symbols that matched the signal's waveform. When Valari scouts passed by, they paused, not to destroy, but to watch. The children weren't trained. They weren't chosen, but the world began calling them the same name. The resonant. Scientists tried to study it. Neurologists ran scans. Analysts tried to codify it. Generals wanted to weaponize it. But none of it made sense. Because the resonant didn't follow orders. They followed feeling. They didn't attack. They affected. And the Valari felt it. Juno Rahal, now operating from the resistance network in Istanbul, issued a quiet directive. Don't command them. Don't cage them. Just protect them. Because she knew these children weren't soldiers. They were seeds. The beginning of something the Valari would never see coming. And then came the field test. In the ruins of what was once Johannesburg, a resistance unit was pinned, cornered by a Valari shock pod, weaponizing gravity and pulse dissonance. 20 lives, moments from ending. And then a boy named Malik stepped forward, 9 years old, hadn't spoken in 3 weeks. Trauma had stolen his words. But now he opened his mouth and sang. No one knows where he learned the melody. It was simple, only 4 notes. But they rippled, through metal, through sound, through the air itself. And the shock pod froze. Not jammed, not broken, just paralyzed, as if remembering something it had no right to remember. It dropped to the ground like a puppet with cut strings. And Malik kept singing. News of the event reached every pocket of humanity within 12 hours. Malik's melody became the new standard embedded in the Ember signal. Children began to hum it in shelters. Wounded fighters whispered it while being stitched. And the Valari began to back away. Not everywhere, not always, but in some places, they stopped advancing, hesitated at city edges, avoided zones where the Ember flowed strongest, because the signal wasn't just disrupting them, it was changing them. Some called it corruption, others called it conversion. A few whispered something even bolder. They're learning what it feels like to be human. It scared the hell out of Earth scientists, but it gave people something else. Not just strategy, not just defense, but belief. The Ember signal became more than a sound. It became a language, not spoken, not taught, but felt, in the chest, in the marrow, in the spaces between words. And humanity, fractured, bloodied, burning, finally had a voice strong enough to shake the stars. And in one forgotten Valari archive station, deep in orbit, a single drone paused mid-task, looked out the window, and began to hum. Orion used to be a constellation, just a shape in the stars, a myth burned into the sky by ancient minds looking for stories in the dark. Now it was a battlefield, a graveyard of orbits, a ring of silent wreckage spinning over a blue and broken Earth. They called it the Belt, what was left of our final reach. Defense satellites, civilian craft, old research stations, all drifting, cracked open, bleeding wires into vacuum. Somewhere in the mess, humanity had once hoped to build its future. Now, we were just trying to survive it. The Valari had anchored their orbital stronghold above Orion's belt. Massive, angular, like a cathedral designed by something that had never known warmth. It wasn't just a ship, it was a throne, the kind of thing that didn't need to move, because its presence alone warned you. Every strike they launched, every drone, every virus, every precision beam from the heavens, it came from there. And so we did the only thing humans have ever done when the odds turned cosmic. We sent a message back, with everything we had left. The mission was called Emberfall, part tactical operation, part suicide note. The plan was so insane it barely qualified as a plan at all. Board the Valari orbital citadel, not to destroy it, to broadcast from it, to get the Ember signal into their core, into their memory, into their language, to show them who we were, loud and raw and unfiltered, to let them feel us, and let it burn. The crew was small. You don't send an army to a throne room. You send a story. Commander Lee Na, former physicist turned resistance tactician, calm voice, sharp eyes, spoke like she was solving equations even while bleeding. Arjun Dax, once a singer in Kolkata, now a voice tech, signal carrier, and Ember conduit, could hum a child quiet, and a Volari droned to stillness. And finally, Elias Romero, ex-con, pilot, poet, once described as a man held together by rage and duct tape. They were chosen not because they were the strongest, but because they were resonant. The launch happened from a stealth rig hidden beneath the ruins of Havana. The craft was built from scraps, half Earth, half Volari tech stolen in blood and desperation. No weapons, just a drive, a signal core, a transmitter tuned to grief, hope, and the human condition, and a cockpit with barely enough shielding to handle re-entry. Because this wasn't a round trip, this was delivery. They called their ship Whisper, because that's all it took to break something sacred. At 2:13 Greenwich Mean Time, Whisper ascended, slicing through the upper atmosphere like a needle through skin. The world watched. Those who still had power, those who didn't just felt it. Old women in refugee tunnels wept. Children pointed at the sky, humming the Ember melody. And deep in orbit, the Volari turned their eyes. The defenses should have vaporized them, but the signal pulsed from the core, soft, steady, and something strange happened. The guns missed. Some refused to fire at all. Romero laughed into his mic. Guess we're making him feel something. They hit the docking node at a shallow angle, cracked a stabilizer, sealed the breach with fire foam and stubbornness. Inside, the station was silent. Not dark, silent, like a temple that had never echoed with life. Walls of mirrored black, floors that pulsed like veins. The air tasted like nothing, too perfect to be real. Dax was the first to step inside. He didn't say a word. He just started to hum. The hallway lights flickered in time with his breath. They moved fast. Lee mapped the layout with stolen schematics burned into her mind. Romero kept watch, one hand on a homemade EMP rifle, the other gripping a scrap of paper with a prayer written by his daughter. The core was 3 levels down, a cylinder of impossible architecture, spiraling inwards like a thought folding on itself. Their goal wasn't to destroy it. It was to wake it up. But the Volari weren't sleeping. The Guardians came, not with footsteps, with intention. 3 of them, faceless, seamless, walking like thought made flesh. Romero didn't hesitate. He charged. EMP flared. 1 staggered, 2 did not. The fight wasn't clean. It wasn't fair. But humans rarely fight fair. Romero screamed, slammed a gravity charge into the floor, and dropped all 3 of them into a cascading fault line. He followed. Lee and Dax didn't look back. There was no time for grief, only signal. At the core, the resonance chamber hummed with energy. And for the first time in its life, it listened. Dax stepped forward. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper. Recognition. It's like it's asking us who we are. Lee nodded once, then tell it. And so he sang. No microphone, no stage, just him, bare and breaking. He sang a song his mother used to hum while shelling lentils. He sang a lullaby he once heard in a Delhi hospital the day his brother died. He sang his life, and the chamber echoed him. Lights shifted, the walls shimmered. Not red, not blue. Memory. Lee pulled the transmitter online, uploaded the full Ember stream. Voices, heartbeats, cries, laughter, poetry scraped from 1,000 dying radios. It didn't crash the Volari system. It joined it, like blood mixing with oil, like a virus that didn't kill, but reminded. They turned to leave, but the exit was sealed. Figures blocked the hall. Volari units. Dozens. Still. Watching. Silent. Dax looked to Lee. You think it worked? She didn't answer, but the walls began to pulse again. Faster. Louder. Not like an alarm, like a heartbeat. And then the voice spoke. Not through mouths. Through everything. A chorus of syllables not heard, but felt in the gut. The Volari were speaking. Or maybe, feeling for the first time. You are chaos. You are music. You are flame. We were not made for this, but we cannot ignore it. And just like that, the units stepped aside. Lee and Dax walked through. No one followed. They found a pod. Emergency evac. Half functioning. Barely viable. They took it anyway. And as they drifted back to Earth, Dax whispered one final line into the calm. The stars remember us now. The station didn't explode, didn't fall. It just changed. Its lights flickered with color. Its silence filled with resonance. Back on Earth, static vanished from the Ember feed. For the first time, the signal returned, amplified, not just from one place, from the Volari network itself. We hadn't infected them. We hadn't beaten them, but we'd done something they never expected. We'd reached them, and somewhere, high above Orion, the ashes of all we had lost shimmered like stars trying to remember how to be human again. You never forget the first time you stand in the heart of a dying world. It doesn't happen all at once. It isn't a flash of fire or a bolt of lightning. It's more subtle, like a slow, inevitable unraveling. And when you look around, you realize that the land beneath your feet is scarred with the same marks you carry in your chest. Not just wounds, but stories. Stories that you can't shake, no matter how far you run. This is what humanity learned in the days after the Ember signal flickered through the Volari core and everything changed. We thought the war was over. We thought we had won. But winning against an enemy like the Volari doesn't mean they retreat. It means they reevaluate. And sometimes, when they reevaluate, they find something they didn't expect. By the time we realized what was happening, the Volari weren't on our streets anymore. They were in our minds. The first sign came in the underground networks. You had to be quick, sharp-eyed to catch it. A single sentence in a post. An anonymous message on a buried channel. The veil is lifting. At first, we thought it was a glitch, a test, a fragment of code left behind by the Volari. But then we saw it again and again. The veil is lifting. It was a whisper, a code, a request to the last of us. The resonant. Lina sat across from me in the war room that night, her fingers tapping the table. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with the kind of focus you only see in those who've faced death and survived. "We've changed something," she said, her voice thick. "We're not just fighting anymore. We are awakening them." She wasn't wrong. But what did it mean? What it meant was that the Volari had felt us, not as conquerors, not as invaders, but as something new. And they didn't understand it. They'd never had to, because the Volari hadn't known what it meant to feel something like us, to live like us. Imperfect, messy, and bound by forces they couldn't compute. Then came the silence. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't like the first death rattle of a creature that has lost all its fight. It was quieter than that. It was a long pause, a deep breath taken by something ancient. We saw them again, in our minds, not through weaponized drones, but through memories. Like the Ember signal had unlocked a door, and now we had access to them. In the beginning, they tried to communicate. They sent us data, no words, just images. They flashed memories of places we had never been. Alien landscapes, dead worlds, impossible structures floating in space. But they didn't show us the parts of their culture that were alive. The warmth, the feeling, the humanity we'd been sending them. And then, just like that, they shifted. The transmission came through as a pulse, a flash in the frequencies we had long since tuned out. A single message. You are fire. You burn in a way we cannot contain. You burn even when the world tells you to fade. It was their first admission, their first understanding. They had tried to conquer us. Yes. They had tried to change us. Yes. But the one thing they had never truly understood was that we were not made to be controlled. We were made to be free. And it was then, on that very night, in the silence after the message had been sent, that we understood something else. This wasn't over. This couldn't be over, because we were not just fighting for survival. We were fighting for the right to keep burning. And the Volari, they had underestimated how long we could keep the fire going. Lina's voice came through the comms, her words clear, yet heavy with the weight of what we were about to do. We've burned their system to the ground, but they don't understand why we burn. We need to show them. We need to make them feel it. The Ember signal, amplified in its purity, became more than just a noise. It became a song, a hum, a roar. We sent it back to the stars, not just as a warning, but as a declaration. I was there, standing beside the screen,